Under the dark clouds gathering over Eastern Europe, Belarus stands at a dangerous crossroad. The long rule of Alexander Lukashenko, once solid and unchallenged, is now trembling under immense pressure from both East and West. The entire region is watching as the man known as Europe's last dictator tries to survive between two forces far greater than himself. On one side is Vladimir Putin, in the powerful ally-turned master who expects complete loyalty. On the other side is Ukraine, backed by Western nations, determined to stop any country from helping Russia's invasion. This deadly trap has turned Belarus into a ticking time bomb and Lukashenko into a man running out of moves. From the outside, the image of Belarus still looks stable. The parades continue, Lukashenko still gives speeches, and the national television keeps painting him as a strong father of the nation. But that picture hides a much darker truth. Inside the country, cracks are spreading through every part of the system. Russian troops and equipment are stationed across Belarus, turning it into a military extension of Moscow. Instead of acting like a sovereign nation, Belarus now looks more like a launchpad for Russian operations. Fear inside Lukashenko's circle is real because he knows that every Russian soldier on Belarusian soil is also a reminder that his power exists only with Putin's approval. Yet Lukashenko is no fool. He knows that blindly following Moscow could lead to disaster. Ukraine has warned that any Belarusian involvement in the war will bring immediate retaliation. Kyiv has already strengthened its defenses along the border and made it clear that any missile launched from Belarusian territory will be treated as a direct act of war. This puts Lukashenko in a situation with no safe escape. If he supports Russia too openly, he faces Ukrainian attacks and harsher Western sanctions. If he distances himself from Moscow, he risks angering Putin, who has a history of crushing those who defy him. This is the nightmare that now defines Lukashenko's every day inside the presidential palace. The atmosphere is tense. Lukashenko, who once enjoyed total control over his military and intelligence services, is now surrounded by people who doubt his leadership. Some of his generals have quietly expressed frustration about being dragged into Russia's war. The soldiers too are losing faith. Reports from within the Belarusian army suggest that morale is collapsing. Young recruits are refusing orders, and some officers are secretly communicating with opposition figures outside the country. The fear of rebellion is creeping closer, and Lukashenko can sense it. That fear is why he rarely sleeps in the same place twice and keeps his movements secret. The political interior of Belarus today is built on paranoia. Every minister fears betrayal, every official suspects surveillance. The state security services, once loyal, now divided between those who lean toward Moscow and those who wish to preserve what little independence Belarus has left. Lukashenko has survived for nearly 30 years by playing his enemies against each other. But this time the enemies are too powerful to manipulate. Putin demands obedience, Ukraine demands neutrality, and the people of Belarus demand freedom. The walls of his control closing in economically. The country is suffocating. The Western sanctions that began after the disputed 2020 election have cut Belarus off from major trade routes. The few industries that remain functional depend entirely on Russia's fragile economy. Inflation has soared, essential goods are vanishing, and unemployment is rising at a dangerous rate. People stand in long lines for food and medicine, while the government pretends everything is normal in reality. The Belarusian ruble is losing value faster than the regime can print propaganda. The pain of economic collapse is quietly turning into anger that could explode at any moment. In performance terms, Lukashenko's system of governance is collapsing. He once thrived on control, intimidation, and loyalty, but now he must rely on Putin's support to stay afloat. Russian advisors are embedded in Belarusian ministries, controlling decisions from defense to media. His once proud military now takes orders from Russian generals. The police and intelligence units are being used to silence not just protesters, but also anyone who questions the growing Russian influence. His government no longer performs as a sovereign state, it performs as a puppet show, where the strings are pulled from the Kremlin. While Ukraine is performing far better in the strategic game, Kyiv's intelligence networks have been successful in exposing Russian troop movements inside Belarus. Ukrainian drones are monitoring the border, and Kyiv's warnings have kept Belarusian troops from crossing into Ukraine again. Ukraine has also launched a clever psychological campaign targeting Belarusian soldiers through social media and radio broadcasts, urging them not to die for Moscow's ambitions. This strategy has created confusion among troops who no longer see Ukraine as an enemy but as another victim of Russian manipulation. Ukraine's ability to fight on both the battlefield and the information front has made Lukashenko's situation even more fragile in terms of safety. There is almost none. Belarus is now surrounded by potential threats from the West. NATO forces in Poland and Lithuania have increased their presence, preparing for any escalation from the east. Russian troops and missiles have turned parts of Belarus into forward bases, ready to strike. Ukraine from the south. Ukrainian forces are alert, ready to retaliate instantly if provoked. The nation stands like a powder keg, one spark away from a catastrophic explosion. Lukashenko has lost control of his own borders, and every neighboring army sees Belarus as a potential battlefield. The citizens live in fear, uncertain whether the next day will bring war or internal chaos. The unique position of Belarus has always been its geography. It sits right between Europe and Russia, acting as a bridge or a barrier depending on who controls it. This location has been both a blessing and a curse for Putin. Belarus is the ideal gateway to pressure NATO and attack Ukraine for the West. It is the last line before Russian expansion for Lukashenko. It is a trap he cannot escape. His attempt to balance between the two sides has failed because neither trusts him. Putin sees him as weak and unreliable, while Western leaders see him as a dictator who sold his country's independence for short-term survival. His legacy of manipulation has finally turned against him. The price of this political balancing act is now painfully clear. Belarus is losing everything: its economy, its independence, and even its identity. Russian companies are taking over Belarusian industries. Russian soldiers roam freely. Russian propaganda fills the airwaves. The younger generation has lost hope. Many are fleeing to Poland, Lithuania, and Ukraine, seeking freedom and safety. Those who remain face censorship, surveillance, and poverty. Lukashenko's grip on power comes at the cost of his nation's future, and he knows it. Every speech he gives is filled with nervous energy. Every promise sounds more desperate than the last. Lukashenko once believed he could outsmart both East and West. He survived protests, he survived sanctions, and he survived isolation. But this time the challenge is different, because the enemy is no longer outside the border. It is inside his own system. The officials who once feared him now doubt his judgment. The generals who once obeyed him now hesitate to act. The people who once tolerated him now want him gone. It is the slow decay of a regime that no longer believes in itself. This is Red Alert Conflict, bringing you the most powerful updates from the heart of global tension. Make sure to subscribe, because what is happening in Belarus today could change the future of Europe tomorrow. As we look deeper, the signs of collapse are becoming impossible to ignore. Russian patience with Lukashenko is running out. Moscow has already begun discussing possible replacements, and even state-controlled media in Russia has started to criticize his leadership. That is a dangerous signal, because the Kremlin never speaks against its allies unless it is preparing to move on. Lukashenko understands that one wrong decision could cost him not only power, but his life. Rumors swirl about his declining health, his sleepless nights, and his growing dependence on Russian security to protect him. He may still sit in the presidential chair, but he no longer rules the country in the true sense. In the streets, people whisper quietly about what comes next. Some say Belarus will eventually be absorbed by Russia. Others hope that Ukraine's victory will inspire another revolution inside Belarus. Underground resistance groups are already reorganizing, spreading leaflets and digital messages calling for national independence. Once again, The dream of a free Belarus has not died, it has only gone underground waiting for the right moment to rise as the world watches. The endgame draws closer. Lukashenko stands isolated, unwanted by the West, distrusted by Putin, and despised by many of his own people. His decades-long rule built on manipulation and fear is approaching its final act. He wanted to be the master of both sides, but he ended up being a pawn on someone else's chessboard. The next few months will decide whether Belarus becomes another victim of the Russian Empire, or whether it finally breaks free and writes a new chapter in its history. Whatever happens, the consequences will shake the entire region, because when Belarus moves, the whole balance between Moscow and Kyiv shifts with it. This is Red Alert Conflict. Stay connected and subscribe to our channel for more breaking analysis as we continue to follow every twist in this high-stakes geopolitical storm. The fall of one man could change the destiny of an entire region, and that moment may be closer than anyone expects.